I'd like to share with you the story of Bethany's Christmas Carol. The author is Mabel McKee, and it's found in Christmas in My Heart, Volume 1, compiled by Joe Wheeler. They called her Carol Maloney 11 months of the year at Bethany Hospital, but during the 12th, which was December, they termed her Christmas Carol. And she was so merry and happy that most of the patients there thought that was the sole reason the dusky-eyed, auburn-haired little nurse was called by a Christmas name. But the head of the nurses, and all the others down to the newest probationer, could have told you that the reason was because Carol was born on Christmas Day just 21 years before. Also that her frail little mother, who had seen 5 little brothers and sisters come into the parsonage home before Carol, declared that her newest baby sang instead of cried on that Christmas Day she was born, and had said to her minister husband, "Let's call her Carol, dear." Always in that parsonage home from which the mother soon slipped away, they called her Carol, dear, and she was as fragrant and sweet and lovely as a Christmas carol. But this Christmas week, Carol wasn't happy, and she didn't want to sing. Down in the baby ward lay her wee namesake, until a week ago snuggled beside its little mother. But that little mother had, without warning, slipped away, leaving her precious baby to the happy nurse of Bethany, whose name she had given it, because she wanted the baby to be merry and cheerful and lovable too. But she had slipped away without breaking her silence, or letting anybody there know who were her relatives, if she had any, or if there were some other persons with a claim on the child. Carol lifted the little one in her arms and said, "I'm going to keep her in my own family. The mother really gave her to me, you know. There's my oldest sister, Marie, both of whose babies died a year ago. I'm going to ask Marie to keep her because she's another Christmas Carol." Standing there close beside the tiny basket bed, Carol had made all her plans. She would go home to Marie on Christmas Day, and she would lay the baby in her arms and say, "I've brought you another Christmas Carol, dear, whose mother has slipped away just as mine did while I was still a babe." And Marie couldn't refuse to keep the baby, and the child would take the lonely ache out of Marie's heart. Oh, this Christmas promised to be the very happiest one she had ever known, just because she had such a wonderful gift to give. But the best laid schemes o' mice and men ging off agly. Young Dr. Grieg assigned her to the peritonitis case in room 26 when the regular nurse came down with the measles. The patient refused to change nurses again, and since she was really quite ill, no one dared offend her. Carol looked down at the white toes of her Oxfords when the superintendent told her that she would have to change her plans about going home for Christmas. And then the tears came in spite of her best efforts. "Oh, I'm not thinking of myself," the girl sobbed. "But if Marie doesn't get my blessed baby as a Christmas present, I'm afraid she'll not have such a happy holiday." The head nurse patted Carol's red-brown curls. "Patient in 26 is sick at heart as well as in body," she confided. "We assigned you to the case because we thought that you could cheer her up. She and her husband have been drawing apart for a long time. She is grieving, and it is your duty to try to coax bitterness from her heart and smiles back to her lips." Carol found Mrs. Joseph Cartwright an ideal patient, in spite of what people said about her being a bit queer. When her friends sent her great boxes of flowers, she always divided them with some patients who had none. She introduced the young nurse to the club women who came to see her, and in every way treated her with such consideration that at times she felt more like a sister to the rich woman. But when everybody was gone, Mrs. Cartwright just turned her face toward the wall and lay very still, speaking to Carol only when she wanted something. She even protested when the girl brought in 2 holly wreaths for the windows. "I do not celebrate Christmas any more, my dear," she explained. "Take the wreaths to someone who can share the Christmas spirit." On this morning before Christmas Day, she seemed more nervous than usual, and the doctor took Carol outside of the room. "Don't let her have visitors today," he warned. "They will only make her remember other holidays which have been happier. We must keep her from doing much of that, or she will have a relapse." Carol was almost ready to go shopping then. Her eyes held a glint of happy anticipation. All her presents for her own people had been sent home, but she had to get an array of gifts for tiny Carol. The other nurses at Bethany wanted to help make the orphan baby's first Christmas a special one. She found the best substitute in the hospital for her patient and then started on her way upstairs to her own room. She heard the choir next door practicing Christmas carols. They would sing them that evening in the hospital, winding through the corridors and stopping at the doors of patients who were convalescing. Carol listened. Away in a manger they began, and immediately she thought of the tiny baby, which was now hers, lying in its plain little basket in the baby ward. And though she had a dozen things to do, the girl ran through the garlanded halls, down the stairs to the floor below, and into the baby's room, where she lifted her wee namesake and held her close in her arms. "Marie's darling baby," she whispered, "you're going to make our Marie happy again and drive away those sad shadows from her eyes. You little precious." The tiny baby was beautiful, with tiny petal-like hands, Cupid's bow mouth, and hair that was going to be golden. She was dressed in a little white slip of the regulation hospital style, but Carol was to get her a beautiful nainsook dress, delicately embroidered with the money the other nurses had given. Oh, how hard it was for her to wait until she could get to town and select it. Back in the gay corridors she skipped, and down the stairs just in time to meet a messenger boy with a package for her patient. It bore the seal of the city's most expensive jewelry shop. When the boy seemed bewildered, Carol offered to take it to Mrs. Cartwright. Perhaps that is all she would have known about the jeweler's box had not the substitute asked her to stay a moment while she made a telephone call, and Carol stayed, straightening a magazine here or a bottle there as she waited. The gleam of platinum caught her attention. The package had been unwrapped and disclosed a beautiful white satin box in which was an expensive wristwatch, a wreath with diamonds surrounding the face. Mrs. Cartwright's hand held the white card on which were the words "Christmas Greetings," and the gray one underneath it which bore in engraved letters, "Joseph Cartwright." One long minute she studied the cards and the gift, then snapped the white velvet box shut and laid it on the table beside her bed. Tears trickled from between her closed eyelids. Carol had seen it all through the big mirror, even the two cards which carried no hint of the affection that changes gifts from cold, inanimate things to love tokens. Oh, the poor dear, she sighed. Why couldn't he have just said, "with love"? The substitute nurse came back, and Carol hurried out into the spicy cold, hurried by all the late shoppers with their odd-shaped parcels, past people who smiled and called Merry Christmas to each other through the falling snow, and as she hurried she sang softly to herself. At the corner she decided to carry a great bowl of holly into Mrs. Cartwright's room that evening. At the next one she decided to carry tiny Carol into that room the next morning and see if the little Christmas visitor couldn't change that tired, heartbroken look into a tender smile. At the third corner she decided to buy Mrs. Cartwright a gift and write on the card, "With love, Carol." At the big store where she bought tiny Carol's Christmas dress, little wool shirts and stockings, and a pink and white woolly baby blanket, she went on the quest for a gift for the sick lady. She didn't have much to spend. All the brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews had sadly depleted her purse, and wee Carol had almost finished it. She never dreamed that babies were such expensive bits of joy. She wandered to the book counter. She thought of a gift book full of sentiment and with a beautiful binding. The head of the department came to wait on her. Carol liked the head, for she loved books as much as she did people, and talked of them as if they were alive. "I'm buying a little book for Mrs. Joseph Cartwright," she confided. "Do you know her?" "Know her? I should say I do. Why, she used to bring her little son in here for me to help her choose his nursery rhyme books. She was the most adorable mother I ever knew." "Oh," Carol's eyes opened wide. "I didn't know she had a little boy. She never mentions him. She's ill at Bethany Hospital, and I'm her nurse." The other woman's hands clasped Carol's. "Didn't you know she had a little boy? He died about 3 years ago. Haven't you ever heard what a bitter tragedy her home life has become?" And then Carol felt more than pity for her patient. She felt understanding and real love. Meanwhile, the girl was talking, telling of Miss Cartwright's generous gifts to orphanages, to charity institutions, to every place that held a needy child. Swayed by a new feeling, Carol bought the most beautiful book in the department and a dainty Christmas card which read, "I'm giving myself instead of wealth, and all I have to you." She knew somehow that Mrs. Cartwright would really know what she meant. Hugging the bundles in her arms, she went out into the snow to be pelted on the way home by 2 little boys with snowballs, to race down the avenue with other belated Christmas shoppers, and to tell everybody who passed her, "Merry Christmas!" She had forgotten the disappointment she had felt because she couldn't be with her family. She was thinking of Christmas now as a day to especially love and be especially interested in the whole, wide, weary world. As she passed the tiny chapel on the corner, she slipped in to see the beautiful decorations. Just above the chancel hung a painting of the Christ as a tiny babe in the rude Bethlehem manger. Underneath was the inscription, "He gave the world's greatest gift to all." It was right then the beautiful Christmas idea was born in her heart. It came with a cruel twist, though it was beautiful. Oh, she couldn't do it, she told herself. She would be robbing not only herself, but Marie, who she loved so dearly. For she knew the little baby would bring joy to Marie through all the years that followed. "But Marie can love another baby," the voice said. "Hasn't she often talked of adopting one? All you need to do is to encourage her, and she'll go right to an orphanage and get one." Carol clasped her hands in front of her and knelt and prayed. Was it right for her to give away this baby, to whom the mother had given her name? Would it bring joy to Mrs. Cartwright's heart? Would she accept the gift, even if it were offered? "You can offer it," the voice whispered. "You can try to bring her great joy." Carol bowed her head still lower. Lovingly, she held close to her heart the miniature nainsook dress she had bought for her tiny namesake. And as she held it, there came to her mind the message her mother had left for her when she slipped away a few weeks after her birth. "I am giving you to your sisters, dear baby, so they will not miss me so much. Babies heal heartaches better than anything else can. You were my Christmas gift, so I know you will be a love baby and love girl and then a love woman who will love others all through your life." Marie had told her that many, many times when she had been a naughty and selfish child. Told her that she must never cause anything except happiness, because she was a Christmas carol to sing throughout the years. Carol held the tiny dress closer and looked at the picture. "I'll give it for your sake, Jesus." Back in her room again, she unpacked the little bundles, laid the nainsook dress and the Christmas card close together, and then slipped up to Mrs. Cartwright's room. The patient had had her supper, the substitute said, and did not wish to be disturbed. Carol went to the baby ward next, took tiny Carol back to her room, dressed her in the nainsook dress, and wrapped her in the pink and white blanket. Then she carried her to Mrs. Cartwright's room, entered softly on tiptoe, laid the tiny mite in the curve of her patient's arm, put the card in her hand, and slipped out before the sick woman could hardly turn her head. Carol's bell rang sharply half an hour later. Breathlessly, she answered the call. Mrs. Cartwright's curved arms still held the baby. Her mouth was smiling, though her eyes were misty. "Oh, my dear," she began. "How could you be so generous as to give the tiny Christmas carol you had planned to take to your sister? Oh, the wonder of your gift." The substitute, only that afternoon, had told Mrs. Cartwright the story of the tiny baby which Carol loved so dearly. She was going to keep the baby. She wanted to adopt it, and wished a message sent asking Mr. Cartwright to come at once. "He always wanted me to take a baby into our home," she whispered to Carol. "But until you gave me little Carol, I felt I couldn't hold one in my arms after Billy died." Half an hour later, Carol heard a rush outside the door and saw a big man whom she instantly knew as Mr. Cartwright coming into the room. This time she fairly ran out into the hall, where she felt herself the most lonely person in the whole world. She wandered on until she reached the corridor where the choir from the nearby church and nurses off duty were forming in line, ready for their march through the hospital. She heard the specials gently opening the doors so their patients would not miss the singing. She slipped into the line right after the probationer whose mother had died a few weeks before, and patted the girl's shoulder comfortingly, and held her hand as they began to march. Her other hand held one of the open songbooks, and her sweet girlish soprano sang with the others. They passed the men's ward, and the old veteran, whose Grand Army button shone as did his eyes, waved his hand at them. Past the women's ward, where there was a little lame girl keeping time to the music with her crutch. Past many other rooms, and entered the corridor off of which opened the room Carol had just left. She glanced through the door ajar. Mrs. Cartwright still held the baby close to her heart, and her hand was resting on the bowed head of her husband. Her eyes were so beautiful and brilliant that Carol knew the spirit of Christmas was in her heart at last.